It is Thursday, March 14th, 2024, and you're listening and watching to, yikes. Let's try that again. You're watching the MMA ECO live podcast on YouTube and potentially Facebook. Might have a few Facebook watchers on the stream today. Either way, happy that you're with us. Where in this podcast, I go over all the latest in Asian MMA news, talk about different things that happened in the previous weekend, forecasting the weekend to come, also taking your questions at the end of the show. If you have not subscribed to the channel, would really appreciate that. And happy that we can have this whole podcast in daylight. We just had daylight savings time and begin something in the US. Usually I have to turn on a bunch of lights to keep things lit up for the duration of the show, but no longer until November. So happy that is a little more sunshine in our lives. But hey, we got a couple big things to talk about today. But this weekend, not a lot of Asian MMA events going on, hardly any at all, really just two that I can think of. So I'll get to those in just a second. But last weekend, we had Song Yadong fight against Petr Yan at UFC 299. And in some ways, I think this fight went overall how I thought it would. I thought that Yan would probably get the decision here. And he did, beats Song Yadong by unanimous decision. Was starting to wonder if maybe we were going to see another split decision against Yan. He's had a lot of bad luck with the judges, a lot of split decisions. Some people thinking he should have won, thinking more of the O'Malley fight, and then also the Sterling fight. Maybe a little bit more, in my opinion, towards Sterling. But either way, it wasn't, I would say it was very competitive, especially the first round. I felt like Song Yadong won that round, but the next two rounds, most likely in favor of Yan. And what I got wrong about my prediction for Song Yadong is I was analyzing this fight, and I realized my flaw was that I was looking primarily at 5-round fights for Song Yadong, is that he can be sometimes a little bit of a slow starter in that he gets a lot of reads, which isn't quite the same as just starting off cold. But I thought that in general, Petr Yan was going to put a lot of pressure on him early, and then Song would kind of figure things out and begin to pick things up in the later two rounds, but maybe too much too late. We basically saw the exact opposite of that. In the first round, Song started off really well. He was countering Yan with the left hook every time Yan would move forward. It felt like the famed pressure of Yan was having a hard time just getting going. And I really got to credit Song Yadong for starting so well, for countering Yan really effectively. But I think as the fight went on, Yan was able to get over that hump, find more openings to enter, and put the pressure on Song, and he wins the unanimous decision. Overall, I think Song, probably the harder puncher, but Yan really able to find a lot of openings with the uppercut, entering, leaving transitory spaces. And I think that honestly, for both guys, I feel like their stock is either the same or rose a little bit for me. For both guys. For Yan, he showed that he never left the division's elite, that he hadn't fallen off a cliff, or that he had even really taken a lot of backward steps. I mean, he lost 2 split decisions, and then there was the DQ earlier. And so, he had lost 3 of his last 4, but all those fights showed, and I guess he lost the unanimous decision to Merab, but still a force in the division, very much a top 5 guy. And Song, I think I saw a lot of people expecting Yan to run over him. And I even picked against Song, picked against the Chinese guy, but I thought that Song showed that he too is I want to say top 5, but when you think about the top 5, I mean, gosh, that's like Marab, that's Corey Sandhagen, that's Piotr Jan. The top 5 of bantamweight is pretty stacked. And so if he's not top 5, he's definitely up there. And he's only 26. He hasn't peaked yet. He hasn't reached his ceiling. So I felt like that was a really good test for Song, and I don't feel like he loses a whole lot in that loss. So credit to him. I felt like he handled himself really well, and I think he'll get back on the horse and have a lot of good takeaways from that fight. But overall, an amazing event. UFC 299, incredible event. I think we expected that it would be a good event. Sometimes I feel like you can kind of tell when an event is going to be just loaded with a bunch of stars versus actually like a really entertaining event from top to bottom. And we really got that. Honestly, like if there was a fight that was lacking in dramatic moments or felt like it was a little bit of a lull, you could even say that about the main event a little bit. I mean, there were interesting things happening throughout that main event, but not a whole lot of like edge of your seat moments in O'Malley versus Vera. But yeah, really enjoyed the event. Ended up going to a Buffalo Wild Wings to watch it and made some friends with some strangers, which was interesting, definitely to say the least. But let's get on to a couple other things. I want to get to the Asian MMA schedule really quick. There's really just 2 events this weekend that are on my radar. One is JCK is back after essentially a month off. They did have the show that they went with Mixed Fight to Armenia, but their first show in March, it's JCK Fight Night 80. Main event is Hailaya Arca fighting Bien Ye. Kind of a run-of-the-mill fight night show. The other event that I will be interested in, but it is a little bit frustrating to me, is this deep event in Osaka. Really, so the fight on that card, which I think is a title fight, I at the beginning I heard it was a title fight. I'm not really so sure. I've seen like mixed promotion of this fight, but the Arisa Matsuda fight, fighting against a total unknown fighter in Madonna the Rocket. If you all know anything about this fighter, let me know. But at the time the fight was announced, I didn't see any fighter database profiles for her. I don't know where they found her, why she got this fight. It is a very kind of JMMA fight to put on, and I'm in the not fun, wacky way. I have a theory about this fight, but I'll tell you that in a second. Arisa Matsuda, her last fight, fights another young top prospect in Machi Fukuda, wins by split decision to win the deep atomweight interim belt, and now fighting for her 5th pro win to be 5-0, fighting this completely unknown fighter out of Thailand. And you know, to be fair, China will do this too, where they will have events where they put Chinese fighters against no-name fighters from other countries, fighters that are they are basically just record padding, and it really frustrates me to no end, especially when elite level fighters get put in these kind of fights. Like I put them in Tapology, but I almost don't want to because they seem like, yeah, just record padding. But you usually don't see that from like bigger organizations like WLF or JCK. So that's why I expected a little bit more out of Deep. Now, I understand there aren't always a lot of fighters at atomweight to choose from. That would be a competitive fight, especially if a fighter's, you know, itching to fight. Arisa Matsuda, if she wants to fight, there may just not be a fighter available for her to fight. And so they kind of have to look a little bit farther to find an opponent. I get that. My sense on this fight, and this is totally just a hypothesis, I've seen a handful of Asian fighters that are really good road to UFC candidates. I've seen a lot of them in recent months taking fights just to get like, almost, it feels like kind of just to pad their record. a couple weeks ago, we had Batebol and Daramisi Jawupasi fighting in Xinjiang province, basically in squash matches against Iranian opponents. And they did exactly what you would expect them to do. But at least the requirements for Road to UFC state that you can't be coming off a loss. I do think they'd probably bend the rules for guys like Daramisi and Batebol, seeing as though they got to the semifinals last year. And they're also UFC PI guys. But Matsuda isn't coming off a loss per se, but the UFC may have been like, hey, ideally we'd love, she's 4-0. I think the requirement was 6 fights. Maybe the UFC made a deal with her of like, hey, if you can get 5 fights before Road to UFC, then we'll give you a spot. I don't know if that's the case. She is an atomweight, and Road to UFC would be strawweight, but which I have heard that it's looking good for strawweight for sure. Looking good for strawweight, which is good news. I'll give you a little bit of Road to UFC tidbits in just a second. But yeah, don't know why this fight was made otherwise. But that fight goes down late Saturday night in the U.S. or early Sunday morning, depending on your time zone, over in Osaka. All right, let's talk about One Pride MMA. So earlier this week, I put out an article on MMAecosystem.com about their 2024 plans. Now, I realize I kind of missed the ball a little bit with this because the press conference came out. It was early February or late January. They held this press conference. But basically, they put out some pretty ambitious plans for their 2024 year. I'm going to show you a few things that were shown at the press conference. This first one here is some really interesting tidbits, and I'll show you their actual schedule here in a second. But you'll see that they're hoping to run a lot of their monthly shows as usual. They're going to have co-promoted shows as well with JCK and WLF, which is cool. Something interesting I found on here is that they are hoping to go on UFC Fight Pass. Now, I checked in on this, and because I was like, it seems a little bit odd to announce at a press conference that you're hoping to sign a broadcast deal with a specific, it's just not standard practice to be like, yeah, we're hoping to sign a deal with ESPN. Yeah, we're hoping to do this. Unless you already have, they're a long-standing partner, and you're hoping to re-sign, but they are hoping to sign with Fight Pass. I have been told that that is not an official deal just yet, but some of the brass with One Pride did recently go to the U.S. and I guess met with some folks with UFC Fight Pass to talk about a deal. I don't know what, how that went or if that's going to work out. Currently in Indonesia, One Pride MMA airs on TV One. Internationally, they air on their YouTube channel for just $1 a month. So they are a pretty accessible brand, but I think just a lot of folks probably just don't know about them that are casual MMA fans. This would put One Pride in the face of a lot more casual MMA fans that they did sign with Fight Pass. But I would expect we would hear about that imminently, because on the next slide, you'll see that they're hoping to have that deal done really soon. You also see there's co-promotions with Canggu Fight Night, the guys at Bali MMA. That's cool. Indo Battle and Prime Kumite. Indo Battle, so what that is I don't know if it was started by One Pride, but it's basically like a feeder show for One Pride to allow really inexperienced Indonesian fighters and more opportunities to fight and earn a contract with One Pride MMA. So it's a feeder show. They're hoping to launch that this year. That's Indo or Indonesian Battle. And one other thing you'll see on this page here is that they're hoping to have 4 fighters in Road to UFC, 4 Indonesian fighters. I would guess all those would come from One Pride MMA. And something that was announced a couple weeks ago at the last One Pride live show was that Yudi Kayati, a former One Pride champion, as well as Gugun Guzman, the bantamweight champion, who is a Road to UFC alum, both of those guys will be going to the UFC Combine in Shanghai this upcoming week to compete for a spot in the academy. Now, I've been told, and I'm writing an article on this. I'll get into all of it later, but I'm told that's not necessarily for a spot in Road to UFC, but it could be if it goes exceptionally well and everything works out. So very interesting there. Let me show you this one. I don't know if you all can see this very well, but I sure as heck can't. But it shows you kind of the One Pride schedule for the rest of the year. Not going to go through every single one of these. They do have 2 new locations. They're going to Bali in June, and then they're going to a city called Kadiri, I believe. Gosh, I can't read that. August or September, something like that. But they also have the dates for the co-promoted shows with JCK and WLF. It does say that in October that the One Pride team will be going to Zhengzhou, China, to kind of do part 2 of the WLF show. So that will be end of October. And then I'll pull this back to me in just a second. But one thing that's really interesting here is that it has dates for Road to UFC every single round. So I don't know if these are set in stone, and some of these I'm just guessing, if they have the 4th week. I'm guessing on the dates here, but I can confirm, I have had this confirmed in writing, that Road to UFC season 1 will be, episode 1 of season 3 will be May 18th and 19th in Shanghai. At one point, they had flirted a little bit with the idea of having a UFC event in Shanghai in May, but that also fell through, and they're looking a little bit more at the summer potentially. That's the next option, but still a ways away from that becoming a reality. But they did look at a UFC event in Shanghai in May. They've had that event, the Apex event, scheduled for a while. But another thing that you may have seen is that Tim Elliott got a fight scheduled with Tatsuro Taira for the May 18th show, or it might have been the May 11th show. I'm not totally sure on that. Either way, he said on Twitter that they originally offered him Shanghai as the location. But I'm told that Shanghai show is not happening in May, that it is being moved or pushed back, whatever you want to call it. So Road to UFC, May 18th and 19th. And then the rest of those dates, I would say hold those lightly, and no locations as well. But that puts Road to UFC in, that would be September and December. All right. So there's some One Pride MMA news as well as some Road to UFC news. I'll be releasing a lot more Road to UFC news here in the near future. Been talking to some people, learning a lot of things about how it's going to work this year. Mostly the same, but stay tuned for that. All right. Let's get into your questions. All good, Makoto. Appreciate that. You said last week that Team Alpha Male has bad game plans, but I think Pat Auger has a better description. The team enhances strengths, but does not adapt to matchups well. So they struggle when they fight a difficult matchup like Song not being able to adjust to Jan's pressure. Agree. The way that I interpreted that fight was that Song honestly adjusted well. I think Jan also a little bit started off on a bad foot. I heard that he may have had an injury or something go wrong in that first round, maybe. But it seemed like Song was using some good anti-pressure weapons early on. And Song's game is built around a lot of counters. So when someone's pressuring you, like for Song, he was able to repeatedly stop Jan in his tracks with that left hook. And I think that things were going well with Song, but eventually as the fight went on, Jan was able to diversify his game a lot more. And like you said, turn up the pressure. So in that sense, it seemed like Song wasn't able to keep up and adapt to the pressure. So I would agree with you there. I think that they do also I think that they have added some abilities to Song's arsenal as well. But I feel like so much of it might be a case to case scenario. And, I heard someone I heard was asking about Henry Hoof trained fighters and how they can show a lot of looping strikes sometimes. And I think, and this was Luke Thomas, his response was that I think a lot of fighters like to do what they like to do, and their coach isn't going to try to overhaul their game to be something that the fighter's not comfortable with. So in some situations, I think that there are fighters that like to do what they like, and then the coach is going to help beef up what the fighter wants to do. And I thought that was a good point. And for Song, you want to build his game around his physical attributes, around his reflexes, his counters, his good striking defense. You want to build it around that, but then just tweak and ramp up certain parts of it. So I think that Song's biggest issue, you're right, would be to fail to adjust to the pressure as it changed throughout the fight. So Bronstetter talked about this a few weeks ago. Do you know why fighters weigh in for their fight? Do you know when fighters weigh in for their fight? On the day of the fight, they weigh in. When they arrive at the arena, they get their hands taped, and right before they walk out. Do I know why they do that? Well, I know that is it California, that you can't, to cut down on extreme dehydration, you can't regain a certain amount of weight or a certain percent of your body weight before the fight. So they'll measure a fighter. And then I think also fighters will just get weighed, not in other states, maybe not as hey, you added too much weight in the last 24 hours. We're not going to let you fight, but kind of just to keep a tab on how much fighters are cutting weight, potentially just as a good resource for them. But in some places and states, and I don't know, maybe one championship does this too, or maybe they don't because they already have the hydration protocol. But for California, I think you can't rehydrate. You can't add that much to your body weight. I don't know what the numbers are, and I don't feel like it's really caused a lot of issues as far as I know. But I think that's mostly why. Is Song Yadong a future world champion? Bantamweight is the toughest division, so hard to see him winning at all. I think in a division, almost like any other division. I know this isn't totally fair to say this, but if bantamweight was not as deep as it is right now, I would say yes. Because I feel like at 26 years old, the guy, you can see him getting better. You can see him making improvements, tweaking things. He's not where he was just even 2 years ago. He's a much better fighter. He's hanging with fighters like Petr Yan, a top 5 guy. And ordinarily, I would say he's a future champion. But the fact that he's also in a division with Yan, with Merab, with Dvalishvili, or with Sean O'Malley, and a lot of other really tough guys and guys that are coming up through the division. I don't know how far Umar Nurmagomedov's going to be able to go, but there's a lot of really good guys there. I wonder if he's going to be able to get a shot. And at 26 years old, who knows what bantamweight's going to look like in 5 years. Merab might have moved on by then. He's in his early to mid 30s. Some of these fighters may move up or down. And so bantamweight could look different in 5 years. It could be even more stiff of a division to win a title in. But I feel like in just a skills level and a trajectory level, I feel like I want to say yes to that. It's just a matter of you match him up with Merab. If you matched him up against O'Malley right now, I think that O'Malley would be really tough for him. You got Sandhagen too, who does have a win over him. I keep forgetting him, but Sandhagen's up there too. So maybe in his early 30s, we may start to see that. The next couple of years, he could just be even 2 wins away from a title fight at the same time. You know, if they match him up with, you know, a Marlon Vera after this, and then he beats him, and then they match him up against like another top guy, he could be right there for a title shot. And it's all a matter of what the matchups are at the particular time, and who's the champion at the time, and how Song matches up with them. But I do think I am sure that he will fight for a title. I'm sure of that. Champion, it depends. The Sean O'Malley of attending a Trump rally. Oh boy, spicy pun there. I asked this on Sound and Pound, but do you feel like it's ironic that UFC pay-per-views are Trump rallies, despite the UFC claim to be apolitical? They kind of are, and I definitely like. There's the Trump rallies. The Nelk boys have been a lot more inflammatory with some of their like political leanings recently, and they're kind of a part of the UFC brand now. I don't feel like it's I don't know where that push is coming from, if it's purely Dana White, or if like there's a lot of people that work for the UFC that are really pushing for that. But there's like no one, it doesn't matter if it's Trump's 8th UFC event, they're going to cut to him after almost every single fight. There's nobody else that they do that with. If Shaquille O'Neal was at a UFC fight, they would not cut to him that much. You know, if Ronaldo was at a UFC event, they would cut to him once, maybe twice. But I definitely noticed that last weekend, how often that is. And I just like wonder what the conversations are of like, this is why we need to do that. And because it does feel like, I don't know, does it help the brand or hurt the brand? Does it help the brand grow deeper and deeper and farther and wider with identifying towards right-leaning audiences? Or does it hurt pushing away people that aren't big Trump fans? I don't really know. They seem to think that it is a boost to their brand to identify their brand with Donald Trump. And again, I don't know where this call comes from. If Dana is the guy that's pushing for that, I don't know if he's, you know, trying to do his part and getting Trump reelected. I have no idea. But yeah, they have definitely chosen, you know, aligning with Candace Owens or Tucker Carlson, things like that. They've done that, and it's not just a Dana White thing. Fighters will do that sometimes too. Choose to publicly, you know, go on these kind of programs. But yeah, no one can say that. I mean, the UFC is clearly a political brand, very politically aligned for sure. Cards on paper are not correlated with how cards will turn out. Low name value cards may turn out big finishes, but that doesn't mean they were good, while high name value cards with compelling matchups could turn out bad, but the pre-event hype will be great. So what he was trying to say is that the name value on cards are not correlated with how the fights turn out. Exactly. And there have been big events in the past that, I don't know, not trying to be on a high horse here, but like, as the event was coming up, I was like, I don't know if this is going to be the most like memorable event in terms of like entertainment and fight value. You know, it's interesting how some MMA brands, like I see One Championship doing this, will put out stats like our fights typically see more finishes than these other MMA brands, kind of as an argument of like our product is more entertaining than the competition. And I've like never really seen that as like a positive thing, because the way that I see that is typically when you get a lot of decisions, it could mean, it's not guaranteed, definitely not guaranteed, but that could mean is that the quality of fighters could be higher and the matchups more even. Whereas if you have a lot of finishes, a lot of knockouts, it could mean that there's a lot of mismatches on the card. So I don't know that if you're purely trying to sell entertainment, then mismatch, you shouldn't care about mismatches. You just want to see someone's head get knocked off into the bleachers, then, fill the card with mismatches. But that's why this UFC 299 card, when it was coming up, we could look at it and say, like, okay, we've got BSD versus Dustin Poirier. We've got, Song versus Yan on the card. All top to bottom, we've got some great fights on here. And you felt like they had a high chance of delivering. Now, sometimes those fights can be stinkers. We all thought Derek Lewis versus Francis Ngannou was going to be a knockout home run derby, but it ended up being one of the worst fights of all time. So sometimes fights don't go how you think. Sometimes that's related to an injury. But UFC 300, like if you were to look at the two events and say which one is better in terms of star power, I would have said UFC 300. But in terms of like pure entertainment, that is a tough one because I feel like they're a little bit more equal. It's like, man, on 300, we've got Gaethje versus Holloway. We've got what else do we have there on the card? I mean, like Figueiredo versus Garbrandt could be good, could be interesting. I think Yuri versus Rakic will be interesting. And I'm merely talking about like an entertainment back and forth standpoint. Zhang versus Yan could be entertaining depending how it plays out. It could also be, I think, a very like workman-like wrestling heavy performance from Zhang. If I'm just like seeing how the fight will go, which, will please Zhang fans, but maybe won't be quite the like Joanna versus Zhang fight that was so amazing. But it could be. If the fight stays on the feet, if the two slug it out, it could be really entertaining. The main event, Jamal Hill versus Pereira, I think will probably be pretty good, pretty interesting, but you never know. Light heavyweight fights don't all like heavyweight. They can be hit or miss too. So I felt like 299 was a little bit more of an entertainment guarantee. And like you look at the card this weekend, which like on a name value standpoint it is like, if you're just looking at name value, one of the worst cards ever that I can remember. That's just on name value. Very few ranked fighters. Even the main event is between like ranked number 10 and number 11 in a division. I don't know. Looking at the card here on my phone, I don't see any other ranked fighters on here. That's not true. Panikianzad and Macy Chasson, I think, are ranked at bantamweight. But who knows? Like you could get a lot of finishes on there. And that's why I am always hesitant to be the first guy to say this card is so bad. I'm like, well, let's see how it turns out. But sometimes you can get a glimpse of it. Like the March 2nd card, the one that was supposed to be in Saudi Arabia, that was a card that I was like, not only is like the name value bad on this card, but I don't think many of these fights will end up being that like entertaining. And it kind of turned out that way. So, everyone finds different things to find interesting in a fight. I'm not going to be the one to say that the way I enjoy fights should be the same way everyone else enjoys fights. Some people only like a fight if it's really technical. Some people just want to see knockouts. Some people want to see back and forth drama. And like you said, a lot of people like the big milestone events like UFC 100, 200, 300, going to have a lot of pre-fight build up to it. And for some people, that's almost enough too. Just like having the big fight feels, all the embedded stuff, the big press conferences like that is in itself like an aura that the UFC usually can choose to create. If they put the right people together, make things feel big. So it's all just depends on what you like. So saying, saw the last Migu interview with Whaley, and she said something interesting. I fight to learn about improving myself. Wins and losses teach lessons. Just thinking about winning blinds fighters to be all and end all strategies. When one looks to figure out mistakes and study, they can flow like water and adapt to any situation. Is that something that resonates with you? It's a different thought process than most fighters who think that winning is more important. I think that Zhang is probably still focused a lot on winning, but it does seem that she has opened herself up to an honesty about where she is and what her weaknesses are that allows her to continually improve. And for that, and I think we've talked about that quite a bit on that kind of, allowing lots of cooks in the kitchen to give feedback, allowing a lot of different people to give their expertise and provide honest feedback. And I think that is really valuable for fighters to be able to have honest feedback. Not just honest feedback, but someone in a group that's going to push them to actually overcome some of those weaknesses, or at least minimize them. So yeah, I definitely resonate with that. I think that it is a philosophy that you can really apply to any area of life. Anything that you're trying to get good at or anything you're trying to grow in. People, I forget who said it first, but it feels like a Bruce Lee quote, but I don't feel like it is. Something about like martial arts is a lifestyle. And, for me and my brand, like, it can be, I've tried to think through that of just like opening myself up to criticism, if I'm like evaluating myself, being ruthlessly honest with where I'm at and not falling in love with my handiwork too much. And that is really, really hard to do, especially if you're in any kind of like performance based habit, pastime, whatever, career. It can be really hard to be brutally honest and like offer negative feedback on your work. But yeah, I think it's good to hold yourself to a high standard and allow yourself to really explore and get used to exploring your weaknesses, as long as you're not attaching some kind of value that you have as a person to your weaknesses. As long as you can detach those things, I think that will allow you to grow for sure. Am I familiar with open note grappling? Yeah, I follow that guy. He mentioned that combat sports is a circus and unserious sport. Yeah, it kind of is. Something I'm noticing about the analysts I respect. Why do they think the sport is silly, even though they're love breaking stuff down? Well, I think if it was a totally serious sport, everything would be a meritocracy, and the awards of the sport would always revolve around technique and who's the most skilled. And we've just seen that like that is not how the sport functions. And I'm not even saying I have a problem with this. I'm not at this time, going into this argument, but a lot of people do have a problem with Bo Nickel being on the UFC 300 main card against Cody Brundage. And if this was a truly meritocratic sport, then he would have been on the prelims, or if anything, like opening up the ESPN prelims, simply as a matter of accomplishment so far in the sport. But it is not merely tied to accomplishment. It is not merely tied to skill and technique. There are so many other things at play, and the UFC has a brand to sell. And if you venture outside the UFC, then you really get into some wacky stuff. And so much of it, if you think about like algorithms on the internet, the most basic way to say that algorithms work on the internet and in social media is entertainment. How are the most people entertained? That's the question that algorithms are trying to solve. And that's what really drives so many other business ventures and brands, and even the UFC, is how can we grow? By being as entertaining as possible. Now, I have some contentions with that, obviously, because talking about, when Dana talking about how he hates things like MVP, and Michelle Pereira doing their walkout this last Saturday, I feel like that does nothing but to like boost the UFC's brand, and it takes nothing away. At least what they did, it takes nothing away from the event. It only adds to it. So there's some things that I don't understand of like, man, I feel like this would be way more a way more interesting, entertaining product to consume if you loosen the leash a little bit in some ways. But no, it's not. And it doesn't. And my question is, does it have to be? Does it have to be a serious sport? I do think the athletes take it seriously. I think a lot of analysts and a lot of fans take it seriously, but I don't feel like everything has to just be rubber stamping, passing an envelope from one end of the desk to the other. I think that they're, and why does the Super Bowl have a halftime show? Doesn't need to have that, but it does. And it's a big thing because it's entertainment. It draws in more people to watch the Super Bowl. So, which I think is great. I love the Super Bowl halftime show most of the time. So I don't know. I agree that it's not a totally serious sport, but I also don't feel like it has to be, personally speaking. So we talked about Bloody Elbow, use of chat GPT to cut costs. Do you think that will hurt the regulars that consume their content? We may not always agree with Bloody Elbow, but they had unique content. I am wondering if that brand, if like their audience, it's gotta like, I would venture to say that like 80% of the Bloody Elbow audience will turn over. I don't know if they're going to be able to revive the brand and make it profitable, but like what made Bloody Elbow is gone. Like, so for me, like I don't have a reason anymore to type in bloodyelbow.com on my search browser. Like, what's the point? Like if you're just like recycling MMA, like UFC headlines and the latest drama, like, guys, I'll get that from, if I want that, I'll get that from Junkie or Fighting, or follow people on Twitter. Like, I don't need Bloody Elbow just to give me things I already have. So yeah, I do think that they'll lose a lot of their audience. Whether they're able to rebuild one is yet to be seen. But I do wonder, like, using AI to create articles. On the one end, I do think that technology will get better and better. And so it's going to be harder and harder to see if an article is truly created by AI, or, because there's a lot of articles out there from even like the Junkies and the Fightings of the world, where they are just like, they're not doing anything original with it. They're just covering the beat. They're just saying, hey, this fight got announced. This person reported it. The fight takes place this day at this location. Here's a little bit of background on each fighter. It doesn't, I'm not saying it takes no skill to do that, but like, just kind of, and they should be doing it. That's part of covering the MMA news beat. I do that obviously all the time as well. But I think it'll get harder and harder to detect that kind of stuff with AI as the technology gets better. But just little blurb stories that are there just for Google rankings. Like, I have a hard time seeing where it's at right now as gaining much of a following. Granted, like, you may make less from the website, but your costs are going to be so much lower with virtually no staff. So I don't know, that it sucks. I'll be interested to see how that pans out for them, for sure. Saying Choi Dong-hoon saying that the rumor is he'll be fighting Jin Yu Shirai on Road UFC if he gets in. Anything you're hearing about the Road UFC matchups? Not the matchups yet, just because I think that the application period is still open. But I have heard that flyweight is pretty much set. I haven't heard that anyone is like 100% locked in, but I have heard Jinyu Shirye. I have heard Choi Dong-hoon. I have heard Dong Huaxiang, Feng Chaocan, Daramisi Jawupasi, Zhu Kongjie for featherweight. Xiebin most likely will be in featherweight. For flyweight, yeah, I did hear Choi Dong-hoon and Lee Sung Chol as well. And then there's another guy that I hadn't heard of that I think is coming back after a long time off. It's kind of weird. I don't know. Like I said, it's not totally 100%, but flyweight is, I think, pretty much done for Road to UFC. But yeah, I haven't heard of any hypothetical matchups yet. And Wang Tsong, I've also heard Wang Tsong probably going to get a flyweight, one-off fight. Give you a hypothetical. I really like your content, but if you shifted to AI generated stuff, I would not watch anymore. Yeah, I agree. Don't watch. If I ever do that, I mean, as long as I am the owner of MMA Ecosystem, no AI generated articles, no AI generated artwork, thumbnails, anything like that. I have no interest in using AI. I haven't even really used it that much personally, even just for fun. So I don't have any interest in that, and I don't foresee myself having any interest in that either. I don't think, as far as I can tell, like, I don't consume things that are AI generated. I generally get frustrated or lose interest when I see that like a YouTube video has used AI for a thumbnail. It seems pretty obvious to me, and I don't even really follow Instagram accounts that use it either. So rest easy that I will not be going that direction. Hi, it's been a while. Hey, welcome back, Wei. What do you think about the fight UFC 299, especially Dustin Poirier comeback against BSD in the second round, which makes me hype? One of the best moments in the UFC in a while. I agree. I loved that fight. Like, I think that was the fight in an entertainment standpoint that it seemed, kind of like the people's main event kind of a thing. That was the fight that I was looking forward to the most. I think a lot of people agreed that there was no way that fight wasn't going to be exciting. Totally just like, really, it lived up to the hype. BSD looked good early on. I actually picked Dustin Poirier by second round submission. I thought that eventually he was going to be able to get BSD to the ground and work some of his magic. Now it's almost become a meme since the fight of the jump guillotines from Poirier. But yeah, I mean, I guess that could have gone a lot worse for him if he would have gotten grounded pounded to a finish by BSD. But loved that fight. I mean, it's moments like that make me want to watch MMA. And that personally, I feel like MMA is a more entertaining sport than anything else, because you never know what's going to happen. A guy could be a favorite. A guy could be doing everything that he should to win the fight, and then gets hit with a left hook and it's all over. So, I mean, Poirier is one of those guys that I think there's so many hyperbolic words in MMA and sports in general that get thrown around way too much. Legend, epic, fight of the year, all-time great. A lot of stuff that I'm just like, all action war, things like, we say things that I'm like, I mean, it was okay. Like, this person is, or icon, it's another word that gets thrown around a lot. I think too much. I think Dustin Poirier by now, and I think maybe it was Dana White that used the word at the press conference, calling him a legend. But I do think that Dustin Poirier by now has earned that legend status. The consistent high quality entertainment value, not only entertaining, but technical, well-rounded guy. You can literally put him up against any guy in lightweight, and it's going to be a fight. Wins over Conor McGregor, win over Max Holloway, fought just about everyone in the division except for Islam Makhachev. But I think BSD's time will come. I think as long as this loss doesn't mess with his head in some way, I think that his time will come in the division. But yeah, you'll love to see it. You'll love to. I mean, there's literally not a person in the world that has a bad thing to say about Dustin Poirier. After that fight took place, I was like, man, I'm already dreading the day that Poirier retires, because I gotta feel like it's not too far away. Not because his career is in decline, but it seems like he's kind of toyed with that a little bit. He's done everything you can do in the sport except for holding an undisputed title. But yeah, I mean, he just has such a long, storied career, and so many epic fights, whether he won or lost. But yeah, love that guy. Also heard this from Dan Tom and Dan Albert, but Song Yadong has no technical depth because he is always on the counter and doesn't have leads to draw the opponent in. Is that something you agree with? So one thing, the biggest critique I have of Song's game is that he does not jab very well. And the other critique is that he doesn't often throw like longer combinations. He does base his game a lot off of counters. I wouldn't say it's only off of that. Whereas like if his opponent is not engaging, that the fight's going to be a dud. I don't think it's quite like that, but he does have, I would love to see him develop a good jab. His reflexes and speed, along with the power, make it really sensible for him to have a really good counter game. Guys throwing, you're beating him with the punch, you're snapping him with a left hook. It totally makes sense. But I would love to see him develop, you're right, a little bit more offensive weapons. Love to see him develop a jab. I think especially with his speed, I think that he could really have a sharp jab if he put some special focus on that. I agree. And one thing I did see though from Jan, he was reacting. I wouldn't totally agree that Song doesn't throw things out there to bait opponents. It felt like in the first round, like I said, he started pretty fast against Jan, and Jan was biting really hard, reacting pretty hard to a lot of Song's offense. So I would say I partially agree with that. Partially agree. So you're saying, I was asking, when do they weigh in? Oh, not why. That I don't know. I don't know that. Would probably guess about the time that they show up to the arena, whenever that is, so that they can spend the rest of their time warming up for the fight. That would be my guess. So asking about Bo Nickel being a part of the main card of UFC 300. I did not hear Schaub calling him the big white hope. That's obviously a very problematic term. And, Schaub is Schaub, but yeah, problematic term. Personally, I don't have a lot of problems with it. I know that I'm going to be watching the whole UFC 300 event, top to bottom. And like it's been advertised from the first prelim, every fight, pretty like big fight, good fight, a lot of significant fights. So I like partially agree with, because the UFC, when they make a bout order, they've never tried to just order the fights from significance and star power top to bottom. And I think, and I've talked about this from time to time, but like that is not how they order a fight card. They order a fight card. I think there's a lot more complexity to it. They are trying to highlight certain fighters. Yes, I mean, technically that does come at the expense of others, but it's interesting when you have a card like the round numbers like 1, 2, and 300, when almost every single fight, top to bottom, like they have said, could be a fight night main event. And then you have all these narratives that are lost, and then you just have big fight after big fight after big fight. And I know that in our heart, that's what we all want, but like, it's so weird that you're watching a fight or watching an event, and then you're just like, oh, we have Jalen Turner versus Renato Moicano next. I totally forgot that was even on this card. Like, I've just been paying attention to the top 3-4 fights that I totally even forgot about this fight. And that's, a fun surprise, or like I think we in our hearts love that. But in a sense, I also kind of see like you're watching this event, and then you kind of like, rather than just being like big fight, big fight, big fight, it's like there's a big fight, and now we're going to give you something a little bit different. Here's one of the best prospects that we have in the whole sport. Let's give him a spot. I don't hate the UFC giving arguably the prospect that they feel like they have that has the best potential. I don't necessarily hate them giving him a big spot. Most of us are going to watch the whole UFC 300 card anyway. And so I don't necessarily feel like it's disrespectful to the other guys, because it's such like the event, the number is the event, So I don't know. I think I think I get a little bit more testy with it when it's like, if it's, when they bury, like this weekend, it's like Thiago Moises is buried in the middle of he's like the third fight, I think, or third or fourth fight on the prelims for this Tuivasa and Tybura show. And he was in the co-main event. And I've covered this before. I have hypothesized that a lot of that is to like they're trying to keep people engaged for the whole event, but still want there to feel like there's a build to it. So like, how do you do that if you're putting all of the fights that people don't care about to start out, and then putting the fights that people do care about at the end? So I do think there's some strategy to that. It doesn't affect how fighters get paid. I don't know that it really affects sponsorships a whole lot, considering they're not able to bring their own sponsors into the cage. So I don't know. I don't totally buy into the people at the top are the people that deserve the most respect. So I don't really care a whole lot. The fight's going to happen one way or the other. UFC 300 is an event, so I don't care too much. Why does WMMA get such a bad rap? Great question. I used to work and write for WMMA rankings, and high-ranking media members constantly make fun of me for being proud of my time there. Well, yeah, I can't speak to that situation, but I have noticed that WMMA does get a bad rap, and I will say that female fighters typically get bigger opportunities earlier in their careers, and it's unlikely that you see a woman signed to the UFC who's like 16-4, where that might be a little bit more common. Like, what was Mateusz Gamrot's record when he got signed to the UFC? It was pretty impressive already. And you don't see, I mean, obviously there's exceptions, your Bo Nichols of the world, but he's a little bit of an exception. But yeah, it's like on Contender Series, we'll see a lot of women who have 3 fights, 4 fights, 5 fights, just because like the UFC is really trying to fill out these divisions. And so I do think that a lot of women enter the UFC at earlier stages in their career. And so because of that, they may be a lot less refined and polished. Could be one reason why WMMA gets a bad rap. Personally, I have not noticed any difference of entertainment value between a men or women's fight. And I know that's a deep, long conversation that spans most sports, talking about, WNBA versus NBA or any other sport that you want to talk about. But for MMA, I have not felt like there's any difference. I could name lots of really, really entertaining women's MMA fights, just like I could name a lot of men's MMA fights. And to be fair, like there are whole divisions on the men's side that get a bad rap too, and have a reputation for not always being the most entertaining. Kind of talking about some of the heavier weight classes, with obvious exceptions, but like, but I'm merely calling out that there's sometimes a little bit of a double standard that I see at play, whereas folks are talking about cutting women's divisions because they think the skill level isn't that good, but no one's calling to cut the men's heavyweight division, you know? So I do think that like women's MMA usually starts the big stage that it gets, it's usually less experienced fighters, and that is no fault of the athletes. They're simply young in their careers. They simply don't have as many fights. And you know, why is that? Why are there not more women fighting in MMA? Well, that's a very complex question. There is no one answer to that. I will say that like women's MMA is at a really weird spot right now. And I bring up Luke Thomas again, just because I was watching him as I was making dinner for tonight earlier. But he was just like, yeah, there's really no exciting storylines right now in women's MMA. And I kind of think he's right. I mean, he pointed out Grasso and Shevchenko, like we have that. But I wouldn't necessarily say that that's like one of my most anticipated fights. You know, there's not a lot right now, and there used to be more when we had Joanna in the game, when we had Ronda Rousey in the game, Miesha Tate at the top of the division. There was a lot more drama, I think, but the good kind of drama, I would say, that makes divisions exciting. But you know, things come and go, and I think things will change again at some point. But women's MMA is at a really interesting spot right now. And I mostly that, but I also would say on the regional level, have you guys noticed that Invicta has not been putting on shows? Like last year, I think they put on I don't know how many shows, like 4 or 5, like not many shows at all. And it is the middle of March, and there's still no Invicta show on the books for this year. Usually, and I was the guy that went in person to all these shows back when they were in Kansas City. But they used to have a show. It was like every other month they would have a show, but they haven't. So what's happening there? Why are there's less women-focused martial arts? Well, martial arts organizations, I think some of it is spreading out a little bit more. You know, promotions like LFA, they have women's fights. Contender Series has some women's fights. I think the pie is just being spread out a little bit more. It's kind of I think I'm mixing metaphors there, but interestingly enough, it was last weekend. There's a Canadian promotion called PA FC, which interesting name for an organization. It stands for Paulus Athena Women's Fighting Championship, which that's the only part of the organization that I would change. Other than that, they seem like a really solid organization. Was even talking to a fighter that was supposed to fight at last weekend's show, Jillian Go, who trains at in Bali and is a Singaporean fighter. I was talking to her last week. She was supposed to fight at the show, but she had nothing but good things to say about the promotion, how she was treated, how they ran things. And but they've only had one show every year. They're only on their third event, and they started in 2021. You know, why is there not more shows? And do we need women focused shows in MMA? I don't know. I don't know what's going on with Invicta. Was it one of the guys, I don't remember which one, but a guy on the Matrix Fight Night broadcast last weekend said that he heard that the UFC was buying Invicta. I don't know about that. I've looked that up on Twitter, and I haven't heard anyone else mention that. So I don't know if that's true or not. Take that with a huge grain of salt. But I do think that I don't know what the solution is. If the UFC were to buy Invicta and basically make it into like a really hardcore, dedicated, female only feeder league, that could, I think that could help push women's MMA forward a little bit. But I don't know. That'd be interesting how that would be run. If they, I would assume if the UFC bought Invicta, that's what they would use it for. I don't know what else they would use it for. But yeah, women's MMA, I think it's just in an interesting spot right now, for sure. If you know any one Pride fights recently at an event, Billy Pasalutan just won his flyweight debut in One Pride. Full matches on the YouTube one. Yeah, I did watch that fight. Yeah, it fought what was that guy, David Leonardo. Won the fight by rear naked choke. Looked good. I mean, I think Billy is a guy that I would love to see compete either for a belt in One Pride again or fight internationally. That's what I'd like from him. He's kind of in that weird spot where he's like, I don't know if one with Road to UFC is right for him right now, or if but at the same time, I think he's better than most people in One Pride. So I would love to see. I don't know what's next for him. Maybe he'll fight for the belt at flyweight in One Pride, but yeah, it was a good performance. But I think he may have been pretty overmatched. His opponent may have been overmatched. What do I think? Do you think he will potentially fight again Road to UFC Season 3 for the flyweight tournament? I'm doubtful on that. And if I had to take a stab at the Indonesians in Road to UFC Season 3, that One Pride press conference said 4 spots. And that's a lot of times that's how Road to UFC works, is they have slots for, like, they want fighters of certain countries, and they'll say, okay, Indonesia gets 4 spots, One Pride or Graham Boylan, give us 4 Indonesian fighters. I would think, well, okay, one other thing that I've heard is that lightweight may not be in this season. So that's interesting. I think that's a good call. I would rather have women's strawweight than lightweight, and then just do some one-offs for lightweight. But if we have a lightweight tournament, I think Windry Patalima would be one of the top guys to put in there. Yeah, it's hard because a lot of the top Indonesian guys are fighting in Cage Warriors soon. So I don't know if they're going to be able to make Road to UFC. But was it who was the guy that won at Cage Warriors? It wasn't Reza. I think it was Ephraim Ginting that won at Cage Warriors, and he has another fight coming up. I would say him. I mean, I don't think that they're going to do it, but I think Firman Muharram, who's the featherweight champion, just beat Yudi Coyote. I would say he'd be a good choice, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, they could bring in Gugun Guzman. He's 33 years old, so he's a little bit old for that, but they are sending him to the PI. So, I mean, what's the point of sending someone to the PI that you are ruling out from being in the UFC? So, I don't know what's going to come of the tryouts. They could also give a spot to Yudi Coyote. I would not personally recommend that, but they could. Yeah. Do you think this is a thoughtful chat room? Seems like they bring up in the weeds topics that are not usually brought up in most MMA chat rooms. I think it is unique and I enjoy it. What about you? I do too. I really enjoy it. I really enjoy like fresh questions that I've never covered before. And I realize there's people that come in and out, and so they don't know what questions have been asked before, but I love fresh questions. I love off the wall questions, even like, I mean, yeah, like whatever you can think of, even if you're like nervous to ask, I don't care. But yeah, a thoughtful chat room. I think so. I've never felt like, I felt like the quality of questions is usually pretty high personally. Will the Road to UFC finals be held in Apex again? Seems very counterintuitive to have that card in America while trying to find Asian talent. Well, that has never been the plan the last 2 years. Supposed to be Shanghai last year, supposed to be Seoul the year before. So that was never the plan. They definitely don't see that as the ideal place for Asian fighters, but it's just that those cards have been canceled and they have to move them. It's hard to put together an Asian UFC event on like 4 weeks notice, so it's just been bad luck the last 2 years running, but I do think that they will have those at an Asian event. My guess would be, let's see, my guess would be at a Chinese event. I'm guessing Jakarta for the semifinals. Granted, that's a separate event, but I think that they'll still pair it with a UFC event in September. My guess would be Jakarta. And then, interesting news hearing about Shanghai. Maybe they'll try to do Shanghai in the summer and then go back to somewhere like Beijing or potentially a new city at the end of the year. But South Korea, maybe. That would probably be the next option. Thailand would be a long shot, but they could do it. Like the Impact Arena, or there's a new arena actually in Bangkok as well that UFC could try to do, but I think they have a little bit more groundwork to lay before they host an event in Thailand. So I would guess Indonesia in the middle, Chinese events on either side. Which division in MMA do you think is more deep, 135 or 155? I would say that's a good question. That is a really good question. Today, gosh, every time I'm about to give my answer, I think of a fighter. I think of fighters in the other weight class. Like, I think the strength of the division, I may say 155. Oh gosh, I don't know. That is a tough one. That is a really tough one. Okay, let me actually just look at. I think you can tell the strength by looking at the fighters that are just outside the rankings, and then also looking at who's at like the bottom of the rankings. So in so 10 through 15 of bantamweight: Umar Nurmagomedov, Dominic Cruz, Kyler Phillips, who looked amazing last weekend, Mario Bautista, Jonathan Martinez, Pedro Munoz. And then lightweight, you got, oh gosh, this may be I don't know. Jalen Turner, Benoit Saint-Denis, Rafael Dos Anjos, Renato Moicano, Bobby Green, Drew Dober. And then the top 10 of those divisions are both Shark Tanks. I don't know, man. I mean, lightweight seems a little bit older to me. A lot more guys in their 30s. So maybe I'll say bantamweight. But lightweight, I mean, that's the division that has the most people in the UFC. So it makes sense that you're going to get, I mean, just absolute killers, the top like 10, 25 guys. I'm going to say lightweight. I think if you look outside the top 15 at lightweight, there are so many guys that could be up there or that could hang with guys in the top of the rankings. And I feel like it's just a little bit thicker than than bantamweight. But man, that is a great question. Do I know anything about Agulali? He's 18 with a record of 10-1. Where did this kid come from? Yeah, he came from Unbo Fight in Sichuan province. Now, he's not Tibetan. He's of the E ethnic minority. And he's pretty good. I mean, for his age and his record, he's a pretty solid guy. And he did just go to Indonesia and beat a Dagestani guy that had a pretty decent record. So that counts for something, but I think he just needs more reps in his system. I personally would not put him on road to UFC just yet, but yeah, I think he fought in just like some random local promotions that Unbowl Fight sponsored, like ABA is that promotion. He fought at the Liangshan Torch Festival, I think, things like that. And then I think a few times with WLF. So yeah, anyone that kind of has that background, he's going to come out of nowhere, just 18 years old. But yeah, I'm friends with that guy, and I think he's got a pretty bright future. Just can't rush things, you know? You can't rush things. Did I see Jailton Almeida get destroyed by hammer fists along the fence? Is that what people call a fraud check? I can't remember the podcast, but they mentioned that Almeida's wrestling is bad due to his bad posture, but it works because light heavyweight and heavyweight are bad divisions, and it's enough for his wrestling to work. I did see that. And was it Ghost that posted some videos of Jailton, some flaws in Jailton Almeida's wrestling? Maybe that's what you're referring to. But I honestly picked Curtis Blades to win because I thought that Blades' wrestling is better than Almeida's, and Almeida may not be able to do what Blades, I feel like, is one of the most like slept on fighters, just because like he'll make it up to these kind of number one contender fights and then just lose. He loses all the number one contender fights, but then he beats most other people and doesn't always have the most exciting style. But he's been getting after it lately. I mean, he's had some more finishes to his record. The guy can definitely thump for sure. But you know, fraud check is an interesting term. I feel like it gets used a little bit too liberally. I would say because like, I mean, if you're making it to the top of the UFC, I hesitate to call anyone a fraud, but in the spirit of the term, where someone with hype or a win streak, whatever, runs into a brick wall, someone more experienced, and then has their biggest weaknesses exposed. Finishes like that are so weird to evaluate. I'm thinking also about Shane Carwin against Frank Mir was a similar kind of finish where Mir went in for a takedown and then Carwin just kind of like punched him in the clinch, and eventually like Mir went unconscious. It's a really weird win because it's like literally just a win based off of like brute strength and, you know, that knockout power, but you're not getting range on these punches. Granted, it's incumbent on the defending fighter, to move out of that position. But like, I mean, gosh, a guy hitting you with one of those kind of downward elbows, he hits you right on the button, and it can buzz your head, and then it's hard to recover from that. So those are always just like really weird finishes for me to evaluate of like, yeah, Almeida got fraud checked. I would not call it a fraud check. The spirit of the word I would apply a little bit more to like the Rosenstrike Gaziv fight. Felt a little bit more fraud checky to me, but I still think Almeida can hang with a lot of top 10 heavyweights. But that was just a weird finish, but an entirely legitimate one. And Almeida definitely had his moments in the fight for sure, but so it was kind of a shock when that happened, almost like the BSD Poirier fight. Not totally like that, but like I wouldn't call that a fraud check either. I would just say Dustin Poirier is the man. You know, I love it when I bring up Reddit beefs. I do. Arguing with someone. Here we go. Love this. This is what I live for. I was arguing with someone on Reddit that kept claiming that Zhang is a communist and all her supporters are communist sympathizers. Do you understand why people conflate her country's politics with her and her fans? Doesn't seem fair that she gets conflated with country's politics. What do you think? Exactly. Yeah. Like I think I've mentioned this before, but like there are countries, and I think China is just one of them, where people assume that if you're from that country that you align with those politics, I think all you have to do is just ask for proof. Just show me the proof. Show me the time where she came out not just as a patriotic, I love my country. Patriotic is not the same as supporting your government. But yeah, just show me the time where she has publicly supported communism or leaders, and then the conversation can be over. It's as simple as that, But yeah, there's a lot of weird double standard. Like no one assumes that of other countries, But it's a lack of knowing. It's a lack of exposure to people from those countries, I'm guessing whoever you're arguing with probably doesn't have any Chinese friends and doesn't know very many Chinese people, or else they may think differently. I mentioned AI. I know it's a lazy way to do things, but can AI be a help to augment how you create content? It seems like a hard thing to do because great content is created through great understanding. Yeah, I'm glad you asked that, because I do want to clarify that I do think that there are uses for AI. I do think that there are. Similarly, I mean, think about like, in a way, we've been using AI for a long time. We use Google search all the time, right? I have a question. I'm trying to find some information. I type my query, my question into a Google search, and then it spits out a response. Usually it'll be kind of highlighted in a box. Then and then of course it'll give me like websites, but like, and so in that way, like AI, I think a lot of people use it for that. It's just like, hey, I have a question. What is gathering up responses from the internet? Are there ways that can go wrong? Yes. Is that totally foolproof? No. But I think that there could be uses for AI for sure to do things that are literally just like, okay, I'm just going to like go and copy some information from Google that I look through a search where the risk is extremely low. There's no risk of copyright infringement, things like that, plagiarism. If I'm just, if I go onto AI and I say, what's the best way to make rice in an Instapot? And then AI spits out the response, gives me the whole recipe, big deal. No one hurt there. There could be a lot of good ways to use AI, but I think in a connecting the dots, critical thinking, creative thinking, I think that's where it gets, which is our heavily used skills in journalism, discernment. I mean, these are all the arguments you see in sci-fi movies where AI and robots have like taken over, is that they lack human discernment, understanding, empathy, all of those things. So yeah, it's like everyone's saying that we're headed towards dystopian futures, and maybe we are, but yeah, there's definitely some uses for it for sure. I was blocked by Tisha Torres, for saying on IG that her holding Rocky Pennington's belt was the closest she'd ever get to a title. Fair for her to block me. I thought I was being fair because Whaley beat her when Whaley wasn't tactically or strategically good yet. In her defense, like, I would say people totally have the right to curate their social media experience to what they want. And if, and some people just don't want negativity. Like, I wouldn't read too much into it. Like, her feelings were really hurt, but like, and I've muted people, I've blocked people, this and that, just because like, I personally, I'm just like, I don't want negativity in my social media experience. You can't always avoid it, but like, for some fighters, like their social media is a place for their fans to gather and celebrate and appreciate the fighter. So yeah, I can see why she would do that. For sure. Does that mean I don't agree with you? I think you're probably right, but I can understand why people wouldn't want that. Do I find it interesting how two people in Colby and Strickland who can't stand the poor me and victim mentality are the exact ones using it to whine? Whoops, you said the quiet part out loud. Yeah, I mean, it's all just branding. It's just tough guy rhetoric, you know. But when it comes down to it, those guys are as sensitive as anyone. In some ways, more sensitive. But it's all just branding and tough guy rhetoric. Saw this on my news feed, but it's great news that Mark Coleman is responsive after saving his parents from a house fire. Yeah, definitely. I love, you know, I'll share a story about Mark Coleman. Just the kind of guy that he is it was like a year. I probably had like 10,000 followers on Instagram, like, not a big following at all, not nothing, but, one day I just opened my Instagram and Mark Coleman had followed me and messaged me. And I had to like look at the account over a couple times to make sure it wasn't like a fan account. But sure enough, blue check mark and all, UFC Hall of Famer. And Mark Coleman just messaged me just to tell me that he thought my page was cool and that he wished for the best for Chinese fighters and was like, if you ever need anything, let me know. Who does that? You know, that's just the kind of guy Mark Coleman is. He really does seem like a very like sweet, good-natured guy. And I think there are people in his position that have grown really like old and hardened towards the world. And to be fair, I don't know him personally like that. But I was just like, hello, like you're a UFC Hall of Famer. Why are you just on Instagram like following small accounts, like sending them good, like encouraging messages? Like, that was like really meaningful. And I have to imagine there's so many other situations, people that could share stories like that about Mark Coleman, but, it truly does. Like he's another one of those guys like Dustin Poirier where like you never hear a bad thing about him. Everyone has his back. And I was really happy to see that. And just made total sense that he would be the kind of guy to like try and rescue his parents from a house fire and nearly lose his life doing so. Like a very Mark Coleman thing to do for sure. What do you think of my opinion on media members that need a press pass to form an opinion? If one needs a press pass to form an opinion and create fake payouts, they were never interesting to begin with or have a mind of their own. Yeah, I don't know. I haven't heard that take before, but understand that press passes, yes, they can denote a level of professionalism and notoriety, but press passes are also given to people that stay within a promotion's good graces. And that's mostly the UFC. Honestly, like you don't need a huge following to get a press pass to most other shows. I've gotten press passes. I got a press pass to Bellator, and went and covered one of their shows as media back when I was working for MMA Osaka, and I had only worked in MMA media for like a year, you know? So like, and Bellator was the number 2 at that time. So really like I mean, can anyone with an Instagram account get a press pass? No, but, yeah, it's not too hard to get one in MMA media for most promotions because I mean, for them, it's like, it's a win-win situation. Like, hey, you're a media member that's covering our event. We love that. So, but for UFC, yeah, very competitive getting a press pass to UFC. And so there are so many people that have a deep level of expertise that not only don't have a press pass, but are probably never going to apply for one just because that's not their style of coverage. Like they're not trying to go to events and interview athletes and be at press conferences. You know, they're more like the analyst style, or maybe they just want to like do the YouTube thing or the, interview people over YouTube, things like that. So yeah, it's definitely not true for sure. Let's see. Oh, well, okay, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I just haven't heard the noise about folks wanting the heavyweight division to be cut. To be fair, I don't want the heavyweight division to be cut. I feel like I hear a lot more calls for like is I'm just like sometimes during an event I'll just like scroll through tweets, which I realize is a dangerous thing to do, but I'll see a lot of calls for women's divisions to be cut. Um, when Jong versus Yan was announced, people like groaned that it was the UFC 300 co-main event. Which they were groaning not because it wasn't a big enough fight, but because it was a women's fight. So that was where I was a little bit like, yeah, we've had our fair share of bad heavyweight main events at the Apex for sure. Talking about WMMA storylines, would you like what happened in 2021 where WMMA was saturated with Red Scare propaganda because of the stuff? No, definitely don't want that. I'm not talking about political. I don't want that kind of drama back in the limelight. And those didn't create interesting fights or like interesting storylines. I'm more talking about like when Joanna fought, I mean, honestly, anybody. She just brought a lot of intensity, but like Joanna versus Carolina was cool. Even Joanna versus Rose, those fights were good. Rousey versus pretty much anybody, but especially Rousey versus Tate. Rousey versus Nunes, even though that was a little bit felt like Lamb going to a slaughter, it was still like felt like a big fight. I think that's more what I would love. And Weili, for all that we love her and like for all that the good that she is in this sport, like she is not a drama causer, and she is not someone that and I know it sounds like I'm like just wanting like fake drama. It's not that I want that. It's just like she is not someone that makes a fight feel gigantic. For her fan base, for sure, definitely. But like, you think about Joanna just like getting up in people's faces and Rousey storming to the cage, things like that. And even like Miesha Tate was a big star as well. And Rose like had some good fights too, where I think it was almost like her kind of like deadpan demeanor was cool too. I don't know. And it wasn't just singular figures. It was a couple of these all kind of floating around each other, I think is what made it interesting. So I think Jong is a great fighter. I love her. But so far she has not, there's not like, what if there was a fighter that just really got in Jong's face and, or just like talked a big game, just like, or a fighter that we felt like, oh, like she could actually really give Jong some real problems, things like that. I don't know where I'm going with this, but I think all of that to say WMMA just doesn't feel as electric as it once did. All right, I'm going to answer these next two questions from Makoto and Ramiro, and then I'm going to peace out. Do you believe that the recency bias is evidence in this sport? I heard Joe Rogan say that Shonan has KO power when she has had one KO win in her career, and it is a decision merchant. Well, I mean, it's KO power is an interesting thing, right? Because it's not just pure strength, but it's also timing. It's also placement, and it's also how your opponent comes at you, which factors into timing. I think most fighters could have KO power if they were halfway strong and just had really good timing. In that fight against Andrade, I think it was the timing that got Yan Xiaonan that knockout. Plus, decent strength and conditioning, but she has the ability to end the fight by knockout. Like that is true, but she is not a knockout artist. There's a difference there of consistency. But recency bias, I I would say we need to see more from her. If an opponent is super hyper aggressive, then finding your timing is a lot easier, I think. So there could be a little bit of recency bias. I would say that those claims are a little bit overblown, but not so much that I would say Zhang has nothing to worry about. Not so much to say like, Yan Xiaonan can't bust a grape. You do still have to watch for it. You can't get reckless, but I would not call her like a KO artist. One of my biggest criticisms of women's MMA is that the top women do not use their sex appeal to their fullest. When I wrote about Paige Van Zant in 2015's era, I would get a lot of clicks. Why aren't more women using sex appeal to appeal to fans? At least the top women are not doing this. They're not interested in it. It's like, I know most of the MMA fan base is male, but like, men don't use sex appeal either. Why don't men use sex appeal to try to cater to a female audience? Is another question you could explore. Again, MMA fan base mostly male, but I think a lot of women feel, and I think rightfully so, have a lot of trepidation, hesitancy about the potential to feel objectified, and they just don't want to go down that road. And I totally understand that. I totally get that. And I don't think that sex appeal is the only way to become a star for female fighters. I mean, some fighters are more naturally, by ever-changing cultural standards, more attractive than others. And so in some sense, like, it just kind of comes, I think, easier for some fighters than others. But other fighters, you definitely see like leaning into that and pushing for that. And so, but I don't, some fighters just don't care. They don't care about that. They would love to be a bigger star, but they're not interested in using their body in that way. And I support that, I don't feel like they should feel pressured to use their body in that way. So that's how I feel. Not everyone feels that way, but thanks guys for tuning in this week. Fun conversation. Enjoyed having you, and enjoy your weekend. Go see Dune 2 if you haven't already. Saw that last night. Really enjoyed it. Otherwise, I'll be running the Tapology results for the UFC event this weekend. Also got JCK Deep this weekend as well. I'm going to peace out. But until next time, enjoy the fights.